75% of Americans would now vote for a gay person. That's a big change from 10 years ago. 60% would vote for a Muslim. 58% would vote for an atheist. Socialist, 47. It's at the very bottom of the ballot. They hear socialist, they think herpes, Bernie. We have to get this.
Then what we do. Congress voted for $1 trillion in tax breaks for the richest people in this country and the largest corporations. That's a giveaway. We just increased military spending with very little discussion, I don't know if you know this, by $80 billion. Military industrial complex.
Including the Democrats.
Pardon me?
The Democrats vote for it too.
Yes, absolutely correct. Absolutely right. All right.
But that's socialism, the military. That's crony socialism.
Well, that's
right?
Crony capitalism.
But the military isn't capitalism. That's the government.
No, but it's who owns the military industrial complexes. All right.
Bill Maher has now unleashed a sharp live TV takedown of Bernie Sanders, and it is clear from the start he is not in a charitable mood. Bernie Sanders is back in the headlines once again, pushing the same hard-left socialist agenda, while Bill Maher immediately targets the weakest points in that argument with a tone that is sarcastic, cutting, and directly aimed at the core of Bernie Sanders' political message, setting up a fast, intense breakdown of the clash ahead.
When he ran in 2020, Bernie Sanders said he would legalize marijuana on his first day as president, but that the business of selling pot would be awarded first to those who suffered most from the drug war. And you know what? I can't argue with that instinct. The drug war has been a horrendous instrument of prejudice and punishment for racial minorities. So it seems fair that they jumped the line for weed franchises the way Indians did for casinos. But it's also what's holding up Republican support for legalizing weed nationally, which would be good for everybody. And these are the hard, practical choices the Democrats have to weigh. Redress the past, or reach out to the gettable white voter who says, you know what, I'd like a shot at getting in the pot business.
Now Bill Maher is not really attacking Bernie Sanders for wanting to legalize marijuana if he ever becomes president. That part is easy. What he is going after is the way Bernie Sanders wants to package it. Bernie Sanders' reported idea of giving Latinos priority access to early cannabis business ownership has triggered backlash, especially from Republicans who see it as politically loaded and predictably divisive. Critics say moves like that can create resentment, distort incentives, and possibly even keep illegal markets alive. Maybe, maybe not. But Bill Maher's real target is bigger than weed. He is mocking what he sees as the modern left's obsession with identity first and practicality somewhere far down the list. His point is that once policy becomes a sorting game based on group labels, competence and fairness start getting treated like optional features. So instead of a broad rollout everyone can live with, you get another ideological addition disguised as public policy, and Bill Maher's argument is basically this. If your policy needs a demographic flowchart before it can even be explained, maybe it is not ready for prime time.
For example, Bernie Sanders, his big thing was always bringing single-payer health care to our country of 340 million. But when liberal, tie-dyed Vermont tried to do it for a population of 626,000, it collapsed like that poor fuck in the Oval Office last week. Bernie, AOC, Mandani are not Democrats. They'll be the first to tell you that. They're democratic socialists, and that's a very different thing, and I don't think people know that yet.
Bill Maher then shifts gears and goes right after Bernie Sanders' beloved single-payer healthcare pitch, and he does it with that familiar mix of disbelief and ridicule. His point is simple. If this idea was ever going to work anywhere, it should have worked in Vermont, a small state with liberal voters and a friendly political culture. Bernie Sanders' backyard, in other words, the home game, and yet the plan still collapsed under cost concerns and practical obstacles for Bill Maher. That is not some tiny technical hiccup. That is the argument. If the pilot program crashes on the runway, maybe do not hand it the keys to the whole country. His job lands because it turns Bernie Sanders' strongest selling point into a liability. The dream sounds noble, sure. So does every expensive idea before somebody opens Excel.
Suggesting if we move toward a Medicare for all single-payer program, which guarantees health care to all people, it would cost a lot of money. That's true. But what they forget to tell you is it would be much more cost-effective than the dysfunctional system we have right now, which is the most expensive per capita on earth.
But it couldn't even work in your home state of Vermont. They were going to institute it, and the governor said, it's going to cost too much money. We just can't do it. It would be the entire budget.
No, well...
That's true.
Well, I'm not the governor of the state of Vermont. I'm the senator from the state of Vermont.
This is where critics say the contradiction gets hard to ignore.
This is where critics say the contradiction gets hard to ignore. Vermont, the kind of state that should have welcomed single-payer with a group hug and organic snacks, looked at the numbers and backed away because the cost came in far higher than supporters wanted to admit, and that leaves skeptics asking the obvious question. If a small progressive state with every political advantage still could not make it work, what exactly is the plan for scaling it across the entire United States? That question never really goes away. Bernie Sanders keeps presenting single-payer as the long-term money saver, but opponents keep pointing to Vermont as the moment the sales pitch met arithmetic, and arithmetic, unfortunately for politicians, can be very rude.
Then the question is, Bill, you tell me, why is it that every other major country on earth,
I will tell you why. Yeah. Because they control both ends of it. If you're saying that the government is going to pick up the tab, but not make the insurance companies, the hospitals, and the doctors not gouge people, right, then we are going to break the budget. It has to work both ways.
Exactly.
And, okay, so then
here's an example. Here's an example.
So you're going to make the hospitals do that? You're going to because that is socialist.
The United States is the only major country on earth that allows private insurance companies to make huge profits in the healthcare system.
Right.
The function of healthcare should be to provide quality care to all people, not to make huge profits for the drug companies.
And that leads to one of the hardest questions behind any healthcare for all system. Even if the government guarantees coverage, who exactly stops the hospitals, drug companies, and providers from gaming the system? Bill Maher's argument is that unless you impose serious cost controls and actually enforce them, the same people already making fortunes off healthcare will simply find new ways to run up the bill prices, get inflated services, get padded extra procedures that somehow become urgently necessary. Amazing how that happens when someone else is paying. And then suddenly the program that was supposed to save money turns into another oversized bureaucracy with a saintly slogan and a terrifying price tag. At that point, governments are left choosing between higher taxes, reduced services, or tighter rules that make care slower, harder, or worse. So the problem is not just compassion. The problem is incentives. Good intentions are nice. They are not a cost control strategy.
Defund the police or military in the streets. Either MAGA's crypto crony capitalism or city-run grocery stores. No, I don't want that. I want a Democrat who reassures me if you like your Whole Foods, you can keep your Whole Foods. Governor-elect Spanberger once said about Biden's presidency that, quote, nobody elected him to be FDR. They elected him to be normal. Normal! You know, at this year's DSA convention, or as it's commonly known, Comic-Con, get this, you had to submit a photo of a negative COVID test to get in 2025. Yeah, no one wants to do that shit again.
Bill Maher also argues that one of Bernie Sanders' biggest political problems is his comfort with what many voters see as the more extreme edges of woke ideology. In Bill Maher's view, Bernie Sanders is not just a tough sell to Republicans. He is increasingly a complicated sell to normal Democrats too, because a lot of voters on the left may want reform, but they do not necessarily want a full seminar in ideological purity every time they ask for lower cost and competent government. Bill Maher's criticism is that Bernie Sanders often sounds less like a candidate trying to build a winning coalition and more like a man permanently auditioning for the faculty lounge, which may energize the most committed activists, but does not automatically translate into national appeal, and that Bill Maher suggests is the trap. Bernie Sanders can fire up the believers, but elections are won by adding people, not by impressing the already converted.
DSA are radicals about this concept, and radical economic policy is always ineluctably married to radical social policy. Their platform, for example, calls for completely open borders. They're for what Biden was doing, but more. You think you're going to win an election on that? This just seems like more extremism at a time when Americans are begging both parties, please, could just one of you act normal?
Bill Maher then turns to immigration and criticizes what he frames as Bernie Sanders' softer, more permissive posture. And again, he leans into a concern a lot of Americans already have: what happens when the system has rules on paper but loopholes in real life. Critics point to the same examples over and over: asylum claims filed with barely any documentation just to gain entry visa, overstays that slip quietly past, enforcement and sanctuary policies that can complicate deportation even after fences. Our committed Bill Maher's point is not that immigration itself is the enemy. His point is that a country cannot run an immigration system on vibe slogans and crossed fingers. It needs rules enforcement and a standard that feels fair both to citizens and to people who follow the legal process. Otherwise, trust erodes, frustration grows, and the whole issue becomes one more political dumpster fire nobody seems interested in putting out.
We want to deal with the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in America. Very few people think it is acceptable or moral that the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. That we have seen a proliferate.
But see, Bernie, you always say that, and I think even the Republicans are not for income inequality. They hear that, but it doesn't compute that that's going to be solved by socialism. Socialism is the programs they already like. They like Social Security. That's socialism. They like Medicare. They like the VA. They like the military.
No, that's exactly right.
And Bill Maher's broader point is that America already has a patchwork of social support systems, and most people are fine with that. Programs like SNAP, Medicaid, Social Security, and the VA already provide food aid, healthcare, income support, and benefits to millions. This is not some radical theory. It is already the system. His argument is that expanding targeted programs where necessary is very different from trying to redesign the whole economy around a sweeping socialist vision. Critics of full-scale socialism often bring up countries like Venezuela and North Korea, not because America is about to become either one tomorrow, but because they see them as reminders of what happens when state control expands faster than economic reality can tolerate. Bill Maher's message is basically this: if a part works, strengthen it. If a part is broken, fix it. But maybe do not set fire to the whole machine because you're excited about a new manual.
Like 75% of Americans would now vote for a gay person. That's a big change from 10 years ago.
Yep.
60% would vote for a Muslim. 58% would vote for an atheist. Socialist, 47. It's at the very bottom of the ballot. They hear socialist, they think herpes, Bernie. We have to get this.
A lot of Americans remain skeptical of socialism for a very simple reason. They do not think it works. Once it leaves the brochure on paper, it sounds great. Equality, fairness, guaranteed basics, everybody taken care of, wonderful. And on paper, every gym membership also turns you into Batman. Critics argue that when governments take heavy control of industries, efficiency drops, innovation slows, and incentives weaken over time. That can mean fewer jobs, weaker growth, less investment, and more stagnation. Then comes the control problem. Freedom starts sounding less exciting when a bureaucracy decides what is available, how much you get, and how long you wait for it. That kind of centralized system can produce shortages, delays, and limited choice, which is why many Americans do not reject safety nets outright. They reject the idea of turning everyday life into a waiting room with regulations.
Congress voted for $1 trillion in tax breaks for the richest people in this country and the largest corporations. That's a giveaway. We just increased military spending with very little discussion, I don't know if you know this, by $80 billion. Military industrial complex.
Including the Democrats.
Pardon me?
The Democrats vote for it too.
Yes, absolutely correct. Absolutely right. All right.
But that's socialism, the military. That's crony socialism.
Well, that's
right?
Crony capitalism.
But the military isn't capitalism. That's the government.
No, but it's who owns the military industrial complexes. All right.
That is really where this whole debate lands for critics like Bill Maher. The issue is not whether Americans should have support systems. The issue is whether sweeping political promises can actually survive contact with reality. From single-payer healthcare to immigration to broader economic reform, the concern stays the same. Ideas may sound powerful in theory, but they still have to work in practice. Americans may be open to reform, but they also want accountability, efficiency, and policies that produce visible results. So the takeaway is not that change should never happen. It is that change has to be practical, affordable, and built in a way that strengthens the country instead of creating a whole new set of problems.
They are doing phenomenally well while the middle class shrinks. Do people believe they should be asked to pay more in taxes? The American people say yes.
Okay. But now this has been studied. The amount of tax revenue that we would get just from taxing the people who I think your fans think you're talking about, the people who own a yacht, does not come close to covering what you want to pay for.
And that gets to the core of the whole tax argument. Simply saying the rich should pay more does not automatically fix deeper economic problems. Critics say the real question is not just how much money government collects, but how responsibly it manages the money it already has. Taxpayers have poured billions into federal and state budgets for years, yet waste, delays, and mismanagement keep showing up again and again. California's high-speed rail project is one example. Massive promises, exploding costs, and progress that still feels far behind the pitch. Boston's Big Dig is another remembered for running wildly over budget and years behind schedule. Add in the billions lost through fraud, errors, and improper payments, and the argument from critics becomes pretty simple. Before asking the public for more, the government has to prove it can deliver real results with what it already gets. And with that, the message reaches its final point. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next.